All right, good evening, at least for me. This is our one lecture from me on poverty in later life this week. You'll also have a short video from the Kaiser Foundation that catalogs some of the stats about poverty and aging, as well as goes through a few examples across the US of different reasons why older adults might be in poverty, just via example. It's a really great video. The link is in your module, so definitely watch that as well this week. So we're transitioning away from what we've been talking about with elder abuse and end of life and decision making kind of things. And we're going to talk in these next few weeks about really health. We're going to talk about, public programs for older adults and sort of the economics of aging. And then part of that is this idea that there is a lot of argument versus providing public assistance on an age-related basis versus just a needs-related basis. So remember way back in our ageism lecture, we talked about the stereotypes or about older adults that people have, and one of them is the greedy geezer rate, or that they're entitled and that they shouldn't be getting all of the resources. So when we think about resources in older adults, right, they have public programs that are age-based, just age-based, not needs-based. Medicare, which is healthcare dollars, and a healthcare program for older adults that's funded publicly as well as individually. And then we have Social Security income, which is 100% about age, how old you are, and you start getting money at a certain age. So these interplay to really make the financial picture of aging a little more complete. And also we tack onto that issues about retirement and personal investments and things like that. But really, the way this lecture ties in is we're talking about the effect of having less as you age, and how we've tried over time to institute these public programs like Medicare and like Social Security in particular to kind of reduce poverty in aging. And as it is a precarious time when you think about it, you stop really making money in a lot of ways, especially post-recession in 2008, when we think about people's retirement incomes, retirement funds or investments being depleted, or the housing market kind of bottoming out, so some assets aren't worth as much as they were. But we also, just have older adults who can't retire or didn't have things like pensions or the ability to save over time, and they come to this end time of life, and all they have is their Social Security income. So on the reverse side of the age-related need is the needs-based argument. So should we be giving older adults money and healthcare options that are better just because of age? And some people would argue that when we look at poverty, it's not necessarily an older adult problem, although there are different ways to look at it and define it in the different parts of poverty that are affected, and certainly older adults are. So one of the things I wanted you guys to do this week, right, was your own budget. So what does it look like to live like an average college student? And we got some variability there and some interesting things. And of course, everyone in this class isn't a single young male or female in college. Several of you are, but some of you have families. Some of you, have a spouse or partner, and some of you have full-time jobs or don't. So, there's a little bit of difference here, but I wanted to let you know that there was quite a span. We have everything from down to about $650 a month up to about $2,000, $2,400. But again, some of those people have have partners or might have a child. So there was quite a span, but a lot of you, I would say around the average, spend about $900 to $1,000 a month on your expenses, as I've put them here, right? So housing rent is one area where I think college students have an advantage here, because some of you either live on, have a room and board that you have, which is generally cheaper if you're living on campus or living in fraternity sorority. At times it can be cheaper. As well as shared experiences, right? So a lot of you have roommates. You probably aren't the sole person paying rent. So that can really help knock down your costs so that you can really spend a lot less than the average person or persons. When we think about older adults, that's quite different. Some of them might not have rent anymore. Some of them may have paid off their mortgage. But if we're talking about older adults in poverty, they're most likely living in a low-income housing situation where they're paying rent as well. So some of the other things that I've noticed is food. You guys are really good at being cheap on food. And again, part of that is, your savvy and your ability to find where the cheapest foods are to get there, to maybe pool food money with roommates or other things. And sometimes, for older adults on a limited income, it can be difficult to get to the store or get to a place where you are getting some of these things, particularly if you live in low-income neighborhoods. There aren't Ralph's, well, pardon me, that's a West Coast grocery chain. Hy-Vee's, Dillon's is on, corners that are available to them. They may be buying from more expensive markets and less nutritious sources, potentially. One of the major areas where you guys have a leg up is healthcare, right? So for the most part, we had several of you who pay $0 a month for your own healthcare. Some who pay $25, some who pay $100 a month or less, some who have benefits through work and are still paying premiums at about a couple of $100 or even more, right? Up to $300, $400 a pay cycle for their healthcare benefits. So that's a big area where you as a college student, or we as adults who are in the working world, can save a little bit of money. And part of it is that sometimes it's paid by work. But, that's a big deal when we're looking at older adults, particularly older adults in poverty. The average amount that older adults get from Social Security a month is $1,094. Depending on what geographical region you live, several of you could live on that and then have a little extra. However, there were a lot of things I didn't include in here, like if you're paying your own tuition bills, if you have ongoing credit card debt, if you have other types of payments that you're paying off, like a car or, another loan, or other goods that you have that you're paying off. So this isn't a complete budget either. So some of you may not spend, $700 a month. You might actually spend somewhere closer to $1,000 or more. So again, when we're thinking about adding healthcare, significant healthcare costs, for a lot of people, Medicare still costs quite a bit. But for those in poverty, you're going to be also in a means-based. If you're an older adult in poverty, you're going to be on Medicaid as well, right? So that's much less money than a Medicare healthcare bill. But if you've had to pay Medicare over time on a limited income, that might reduce you more and more and more, and then you may be closer to a poverty level. So this is just a snapshot, but I wanted to give you a sense of what the poverty line is in the United States. So if we're looking at the official poverty line, if you're at 100% of the poverty line, which means you're at poverty level, you are getting about $11,770 a year. That's $980 a month. And if you'll note that I said that the average income for Social Security is $1,000 a month, that's not too far away from the poverty line. you're at 125% of the poverty line are considered near poor when you make $1,226 a month. And you're at 150% of the poverty line, you're at risk, not quite as close to near poor, but you're likely to be what we'll call a tweener or somewhere near if you make $1,471 a month or $17,000, $17,500 a year. So that might sound like a lot to some of you who don't really have a full-time job or make that much money or work hourly as college students, but for a working adult, $17,000 a year is very, very low given all of the different bills, types of things you're paying for, including probably a dependence like kids, and healthcare premiums for everybody. It can be expensive. So again, think around $1,000, near poor $1,200 a month is poverty line here. Okay, so let's look at the different poverty rates across the lifespan, and this again is the official poverty line. So we're looking here at this graph, and we're seeing all persons, the first graph here, all persons, men, women, married, non-married, white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, poor, and near poor. So this isn't necessarily age here. This is just all people age 65 and older that are below the poverty level. So you can see that overall it's about 9-ish%. So right now they would estimate about 9.4% of the average poverty, or the official poverty line. And when we look at who's near poor, I know that 125% of the poverty line, that's the darker line. So there are a lot of disparities that we can see here. People who are non-married, much higher poverty rates, not a dual income to consider. That can help tremendously. And if you are a single or widowed, non-married, older adult, you're much more likely to be in poverty. Black, Asian, and Hispanic older adults also much more likely than their white counterparts to be in poverty. When we look at a lifespan graph here, so this again brings up this needs-based versus age-based. So the greedy geezer stereotype comes back here, and people say, well, if older adults are only, at let's say 9% of them are in poverty, then why do we care that much? Because the rates in younger adults are much, much higher than they are in older adults. So we see a lot of children in poverty, particularly now it's sort of swung the pendulum into, it used to be older adults much more so to be in poverty, but now they have lower rates and the under 18-year-olds have really taken over. And this really gets people because they see this need in younger age groups and the lack of entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare for children, although there is healthcare programs for children and for poor children as well, to say, well, why should you just get all these entitlements because you're older? Because then you don't have more need necessarily than a younger age group. So this is where some of the argument comes in. And women, I should mention as well, when we look at this, women are more likely to be in poverty than men, and a lot of that is due to having lower jobs, having more sporadic work, right, and being caregivers, not just for children, but for aging parents as they get older, and they have there's a stark difference in gender earnings over the lifetime, and women are at a huge disadvantage there. And also, women were less likely than men to receive pensions, to be in jobs that have pensions or retirement, right? So think of pension as like a retirement fund. So they are more likely to be dipping into their own monies, as well as they're likely to live longer and to have to spend a lot of their assets of the couple on medical bills and end of life and funeral expenses of husbands. So that's why older women are more likely to be in poverty than older men. So the poverty rate sounds good, right? When it's like, hey, it's only 9.4%, and it's gotten lower over time when we look at that lifespan graph. But actually, that's the official poverty measure. And what people and economists and other aging professionals and other professionals in general are saying is they would like to see the poverty measure changed to be more accurate to what is actually in poverty. So when you look at what they call the supplemental poverty measure, which most researchers and analysts favor over the official poverty measure, when you look at it, it counts some things that weren't counted before, like rent subsidies and tax credits, nutrition assistance, and they subtract other expenses like income taxes, childcare costs, out of care medical expenses. So it's a more robust measure of poverty, basically. So when we look at this, we actually see more older adults are in poverty, and certainly that sort of near poor range. So it goes from about 10% up to 15% who are at that, 100% poverty line, making about $980 a month. So it's not maybe such great news. We do have at least 15% if we look at a more robust measure of poverty for older adults. And also, just to sort of go over this again, we're doing this: younger people are in more trouble than older adults. Don't they deserve more entitlement programs? When you look at it and you do the supplemental poverty measure, the more robust measure, childhood poverty actually goes down to 18%, and of course, older adults go up. So it's sort of evening out the scales in some ways for age. So the book talked about this, and it's an interesting concept, the tweeners. And you may, it's not tweeners like in between teenagers and children, but it's in-betweeners for poverty line and older adults. So these are older adults who are in the lower middle class, but they don't really qualify for any means-based programs or other programs yet, like SNAP, or food assistance, because they don't quite make not enough. They make a little bit too much. Than that. They're sort of stuck in the middle. But they're one bad situation, one emergency away from poverty, essentially. They usually live paycheck to paycheck, might be able to put a tiny bit away for a staycation or something to have a little bit of savings to do. But they don't have a lot of ready cash, and they certainly don't have a lot of savings, and they don't have enough savings to be able to bounce back for an emergency. So they have something like one of them needs to go into long-term care because they don't qualify for Medicaid yet, but they have a little bit of asset. They might own their own house, but they don't really have a lot of ready cash. If they're divorced, and perhaps the older female or older male loses that second income and loses that even second Social Security income, or they have a major disease that's costly, then all of a sudden they're hitting the supplemental poverty measure or the official poverty rate, and they would be down there. So we have this group of older adults that's a pretty large group that they're okay, but they're at risk, right? So that sort of near poor tweener category, but they don't qualify for any needs-based programs. They make a little too much. Your parents may have complained about this when they talked about the FAFSA or filling out financial aid, right? Like I make just enough to be too much for you to get the good loans. So the question we have about this, when we look at needs-based programs, they don't qualify for them, but they're clearly at risk. So maybe this is an argument, the tweeners are an argument for an age-based entitlement, like Medicare, like Social Security, or something similar, because there are such a large amount of them at risk. Maybe they are a pretty big age group, and maybe this is an argument to have this age-based entitlements. And this is just a reminder to watch the Old and Poor video when we're looking at from the Kaiser Family Foundation. They really do a great job of illustrating these concepts and give you some good examples, and follow a couple of older adults, and you'll see what it's like to be living in different levels of poverty in different areas of the United States, and the impact it has on healthcare, quality of life, and things like that. One thing that I want to talk about that's really important for older adults, and those of you either in nutrition or perhaps, other social service programs might know this, but food insecurity is a big issue. They may not be starving older adults, but they're food insecure, which means that they don't have access to enough food most of the time. And we actually see here, when we look at food insecurity by age group, that there's a large number of older adults and a growing number, right? So the rates rise over as you get older, of people who are highly food insecure. So at the lower levels, older adults look like, at the lower levels of food insecurity, it's going down by age, but at the highest level of food insecurity is actually rising by age, which is sort of making age-based entitlement programs look good, because the older you get, the more at risk for being food insecure you are. So we know that food insecurity is a big deal. 1 in 7 seniors live in poverty, and 5.4 million of them are food insecure. And food insecure seniors, it's not just about necessarily that I don't know where my next meal is or my next good meal. They're more likely to experience healthcare problems than their counterparts who are not food insecure. And more likely to experience chronic health conditions than other seniors. 60% are more likely to experience depression. 53% of food insecure are more likely to report a heart attack. 52% are more likely to develop asthma. 40% are more likely to experience congestive heart failure, as shown. And interestingly, this might give some light into this, is that when Feeding America looks, which is a organization that's sort of an umbrella for a lot of different feeding programs that provide food for food insecure individuals, 63% of their client households with a senior or an older adult in them report having to make choices between paying for food or paying for medication. So that is sort of that health link there too. We see that if you're having to pay for food and having to forego medication, that might be the case. But also if you're, having to sustain all of these medications, maybe the food that you can afford is either nothing or very poor quality. Let me see if there was anything else. So when we look at the different programs, SNAP, which used to be food stamps. If you're me, you remember food stamps. Some of you will, or some of you have heard the term food stamps. But SNAP is a federal program, right, that is for giving you better access to food if you're food insecure. So they have a kind of a difficult algorithm to figure out if you're food insecure and how much you should get. You can kind of see it here. They have a minimum and maximum for your benefit computation. In Kansas, we have the Kansas Food Assistance Program, which is the equivalent, of SNAP. And this is a needs-based program, right? So this is people who are at the most need monetarily and food insecure. You get a certain amount based on your income. So if you need food or you need assistance with getting food, you'll get more and more assistance the less money you have. So this is a needs-based program. Interestingly, older adults don't utilize this program very much. Only 3 out of 5 who are eligible participate. Some of this might be due to lack of education. Others, it might be stigma. But we have 5.2 million seniors out there who could be benefiting who aren't, which is a great case for more outreach to seniors about SNAP and the benefits of SNAP. When we look at different feeding food programs, such as the larger umbrella, like I mentioned with Feeding America, has programs like Meals on Wheels and all kinds of things. We see that 17% of their clients are seniors, age 60 and above. An additional 15% are in their 50s. About 12% of the meal programs that are under the umbrella Feeding America are home delivery programs. 7% are grocery programs like senior bag programs, and these are, again, targeted for seniors. That 12% of meal programs are home delivered to seniors. 7% are grocery programs for seniors. Okay. So that's my soapbox on food insecurity, which is a big issue among older adults. And we have some programs from the Older Americans Act that are funded, like Meals on Wheels, which is funded through the Area Agencies on Aging, given federal money by the Older Americans Act. So we have a little bit of help for that. So some of the problems that we see when we're looking at the poverty rate for seniors and getting people food when they need it is we're running out of money in a lot of ways, and we're not really decreasing poverty. So, also we see, right, that a growing number of people are becoming older. So when these entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare, and also programs that feed older adults and give other programs to older adults like the Older Americans Act, they are getting cut, they're getting tweaked, they're getting, plucked, and they're losing money rapidly. But, so that increases the poverty rate for older adults because, like we said, a lot of older adults rely on Social Security income only. And if that shrinks and shrinks, I know it's not that far from $1,200 to $1,000, and then you're under the poverty line for older adults. So if we don't have these age-based entitlement programs, poverty rates would probably be skyrocketing if we didn't. In fact, I know that I have a stat here that if we and I'll probably get to it, but the idea that there will be a growing number of older adults who are in poverty if we get rid of or continue to shrink these programs. So we look at in this argument between should it be a needs-based system, should we have entitlement programs only based on need, or should we have age-based entitlements like Social Security and Medicare, because we know that older adults are vulnerable to these, to health and well-being issues. So, some of the needs-based groups you can see in the age-based groups, right? So it'll be all ages above get that. So we see a lot of problems in all of these groups. And I don't think that there's one or the other, but perhaps a combination of age and needs-based that might be best. So how do we target our services so that older adults don't have to buy medication or buy food? And this was in some of the readings in your text. So what if we left the situation as is and we had our entitlement programs the way they are? The estimates say that the Social Security tax rate will have to be boosted by 40% in the next couple of decades to keep up with the pace of the growing number of seniors. So, we have a lot of work to do if we're going to keep all of these, if we're going to keep our poverty rates as low as we have and continue to lower them. If we keep losing Social Security income, they're going to get bigger. And particularly, those disparities will show up for Black African Americans, Hispanic individuals, Asian older adults, women who are older as well, right? So what if we do what you put in is what you get out, seems fair up front, like a personal investment. And you'll talk about this in Social Security fixes next week. So it was more like a savings account. I put my money in and I get that exact money out, which could be good, but it also differentially hurts those people who don't have enough to really put in, who probably need the most at the end. If we raise the age limit of Medicare to try to save money, possibly, that might help, but that will also limit, those those people who used to be eligible for it to get accessible health care, and they'll be back in the marketplace and likely have to continue to work to get those benefits from work. What about if we just said, why don't we base these on means-based or needs-based instead? Well, we could do that. We could certainly say, the book talked about a lot of different options for what if we sort of said, everybody below this level gets X amount of Social Security, and the more you make, the less Social Security income you get to receive back, because you make enough to get by, or you make a good amount and you don't need as much. Or what if we made other sort of accommodations that were more needs-based, for those entitlement programs that would be both age and needs-based. That's certainly a possibility as well. When we think about it, it's very different than our current system, and I think people, it would take a little while for us to shift, particularly when we think about the people who do make a decent amount. And if they're still paying in the same amount but not getting out as much, it also seems a little bit unfair to them. If we did have a sort of affluence test in those programs, they could have some graduated benefits, and households like below a median level of income could retain full benefits, but households above could have graduated benefits. We could potentially do some cost sharing. So under the Older Americans Act, a lot of those programs, right, are free. You don't have to pay for Meals on Wheels. You don't have to pay for certain things. So what if we did make them sort of a sliding scale program, and we asked older adults to pay a little bit? Instead of asking for donations, we charged on a sliding scale fee. Those programs might be around more, be able to sustain more people. And if you made below the poverty line, perhaps it would still be free. So that's one argument there. And there are some other options that people have looked into, to be able to say that, and those are also outlined in your readings, and we'll talk a lot about those when we talk about Social Security too. One of the things that we are really keen on in aging is sort of moving away from this war between the generations, right? So when we think about poverty and aging and wanting to hold on to these entitlement programs to help not create more disadvantaged older adults, our automatic adversary are the other age groups who also want their share of the pot, right, of the money. And a lot of times younger children and their families are on that other side, right? So instead of making this about, well, you get it or you get it, we're really trying to make this an intergenerational and a generational interdependence issue. So instead of each generation being responsible for itself, this promotes kind of everybody coming together for a common good. Programs that incorporate relationships between generations and are beneficial for both. And one of those interesting ones is called foster grandparents. I don't know if any of you've heard of them, but foster grandparents actually pays on a somewhat, meager scale, but pays older adults to be foster grandparents to younger children, to mentor them in a lot of ways, to provide them with tutoring and a mentor, role models, and be friends with children. So it gives a lot of benefits to the older adults, including some pay, but also social connection and a sense of meaning and giving back. And it gives benefits to the younger generations to have free tutoring and free mentoring, and to be able to have extra social support, which is useful for a lot of mental and physical health in children. So that's a program that is sort of that helps generations come together and solve some of the problems of both sides of the equation when we look at poverty and needing support services on both sides and what each can provide.